Hello, hello, hello. Happy Thursday night. This is Dr. Jessica Freedman. I'm going to wait for people to arrive and then we will go ahead and get started with tonight's Q&A. Okay, just going to wait for some people to show up. It always takes a little bit of time and then we'll get started with our questions for tonight. If you, as you arrive, please let me know where you are watching this from in terms of geographically speaking. I'd love to know where you're watching from. And also let me know what stage of the process you or your child are in. Are you a pre-med? Are you currently an undergrad? Are you a high school student? Are you a medical student? Where are you in the process? And what kinds of questions do you have, in terms of, where you are in this process? Because we really work with students who are at all stages of the process with regards to medical school admissions. The majority of our applicants are either about to start college or they are well on their way to being successful pre-meds, or they are in the application process itself. So I'd love to know where you are watching this from. Hold on just 1 minute. I need to send a quick text. Hold on. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get started. My name is Dr. Jessica Freedman. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, as our Facebook group is certainly growing and our audience is growing, I am an emergency physician. I am the chair and founder of Med Edits Medical Admissions. I am a former faculty member, medical school admissions committee member, residency associate residency director and residency leadership in emergency medicine at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai. So I have been involved in medical education and medical admissions for my entire career. That literally started when I myself was a medical student many, many years ago. And one of the things, or, one of the many benefits of having been, in this arena for such a long time is that I and my team, we've all been able to observe the trends in medical admissions, and things really change. They change every single year. And so we really have our finger on that pulse in terms of how things change from year to year. And we're even seeing changes for this year. And this is one of the benefits of working with us, because you're not getting sort of a narrow kind of one size fits all type of experience. You are getting our pooled experience of understanding, I don't even want to call it the industry because it's not an industry, but we really understand medical education and medical school admissions and the residency match pretty comprehensively. So I am going to head over to our Facebook group where I ask people to post questions. The day of these lives, I hold these lives every Thursday night at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. And the day of, I will ask people if they have any questions and to post those questions in advance. And we will always start our sessions by answering those questions. So I'm going to head on over to our Facebook group and let me just see what questions we have. Okay. Gayatri asks, what are good universities to go to for the pre-med major? We are in Georgia. So first of all, pre-med is not a major. Pre-med is essentially a set of prerequisites that anyone who is interested in going to medical school must take. That includes some math. It includes general chemistry, organic chemistry, physics, biology. We also like to see statistics, biochemistry, sometimes genetics. So pre-med is not a major. You can major in anything as a pre-med. It does not matter what you major in. You need to major in the discipline that is the most interesting to you. And as far as what is a good pre-med college, honestly, any college is a good pre-med college. It is about taking advantage of what is available to you at your undergraduate institution, whatever that undergraduate institution may be. I can tell you that we work with students who go to very, very selective undergraduate private colleges who have the same level of success as our students who go to their state schools. So you should choose the undergraduate institution that works the best for you in terms of overall fit, in terms of finances, and in terms of where you would like to be geographically as well. Okay. I have heard so many differing opinions on what constitutes clinical experience. Some say if you can smell the patient, it is clinical, while others say you must actually be touching the patient, taking vitals, etc. Can you give your professional advice? My son volunteers at an adolescent psychiatric hospital, leading recreation time with patients, and is considering scribing. Are these clinical? Other examples include hospice volunteering, being a sitter for patients in a hospital. So I'm going to kind of go through this one by one. And there definitely is a lot of confusion regarding what is considered a clinical activity, what is considered a volunteer or community service activity. If you are taking care of patients, meaning that you are attending to them in some type of medically oriented way, that constitutes clinical experience. So using these examples that you've given, if you're volunteering at an adolescent psychiatric hospital, to me, that is community service work, just based on the description that you offer. If you're leading recreation sessions, this is not clinical, this is recreation. So that would be a community service opportunity, a valuable one, but community service. Scribing is most definitely clinical. You're conversing with a patient, you're taking a history, you're talking with physicians, you are working with the care team. So that is most definitely a clinical experience. Hospice volunteering, again, not clinical. So because you're volunteering, you're not actually taking care of the patients. Now, if you were working as a certified nursing assistant in hospice, or if you were working, as a medical assistant in hospice, that would be a clinical experience. So I hope that that kind of clears up, some preconceived ideas of what is considered clinical versus non-clinical. Julie asks, do med schools ever host more than one round of interviews to admit students? I assume, Julie, that you're asking if a individual student gets more than one interview session. And no, that's very, very rare. On occasion, if a student has an issue with an interviewer for some reason, or if an interviewer has an issue with a student, it's possible that they might invite that student back for a second round of interviews, but this is really the rarity. Okay. Maria asks, I have two questions. If a candidate is applying to MD, PhD programs and is not accepted, would that applicant be automatically considered as a candidate for the school's MD program, or would he or she have to indicate this on the application? When should one start asking for recommendations if applying this year for 2025 admission? So if you are applying to an MD, PhD program at most medical schools, you will automatically be considered for the MD program alone if you are not admitted to the MD, PhD program. There may be some schools, and I don't know sort of the specifics for every single medical school in the country. There may be some medical schools where you have to indicate if you're willing to be considered for the MD program alone, but that's going to be a very school specific kind of determination. And when should you start asking for recommendations? If you're applying this spring for admission in 2025, to matriculate in 2025, you should start asking for those letters of recommendation now. So we are most definitely working with our students now who are applying this spring, and we are working on their letter portfolios, and they are starting to request those letters of recommendation now. The only way that they're not requesting those letters of recommendation at this point is if it's still a relatively new working relationship, and let's say there's another, crucial month or two, January, February, March, April, maybe 3 months, where they need to develop some kind of working relationship relationship with that individual whom they're asking for a letter. In that case, we might recommend delaying asking. But if you have had the working relationship with the individual whom you plan on asking for that letter of recommendation, then you certainly can be asking for that letter now. Because the earlier the better, because letter writers hate it when you ask them for a letter and you're like, I really want that letter done in the next 3 weeks. So it's always a common courtesy to give people as much leeway as possible. Do you consider the Waxman Institute Summer Experience Program at the Waxman Institute, Rutgers University, a great research experience for high school students? It is a paid in-person program, but virtual options are there too. Yes, this is definitely the Waxman experience at Rutgers for a high school student. Most definitely is going to be a very good experience for a high school student. Yes, it's sometimes very tough for high school students to get research experience. So these kinds of formal research programs where you're paired up with an individual, or maybe you're even working with an individual, with a team of students, those can be super valuable. And Waxman is definitely a respected research institute. Yes. Julie asks, are hybrid classes at university for non-science classes okay, or is it looked at unfavorably by medical schools? If the undergraduate institution is a reputable institution and they are offering hybrid classes, I would not worry about this. Medical schools will not accept online classes that are exclusively held online. Okay. What are good, easy access to clinical exposure, research, shadowing, great letter of recommendation, pre-med undergrad schools in Illinois? Okay, so again, any undergraduate institution is great for pre-med. You can find certainly research, great letters at any undergraduate institution. With regards to finding access to clinical exposure and shadowing, you want to check the location of the undergraduate college. Is it close to hospitals? Is the college affiliated with a medical school? Is the college in a city? So you're going to tend to have more of these opportunities when you are going to college at an institution that's in an urban area surrounded by at least one major medical center or one major hospital. So certainly I think it's easier for students when they go to undergraduate colleges in cities. But I can also tell you that we work with students who go to small liberal arts colleges in, not in rural, in more rural areas and not in urban areas, and they do very well in the medical school admissions process. Dawn asks, I've heard that students can take the MCAT twice if necessary. What is the minimum score you would recommend students have in order to not take it a second time for allopathic or MD granting medical schools? This is a great question. And the first thing that I always bring up when we're talking about average MCAT scores is you want to look at the average MCAT score for matriculants in your demographic group, because there is going to be huge variation between the different demographic groups for what those averages are. So let's say, for example, if the average for your demographic group is a 514, ideally you want to get a 514, to be the most competitive. Our general recommendation is you want a 511 or 512. But when we are making this recommendation, we are looking at the entire applicant. We are looking at the applicant's experiences. We're looking at their undergraduate profile. We're looking at their letters of recommendation. We're looking at their grade trends. We're looking at a whole bunch of different criteria when we are making the absolute recommendation if we think a student needs to retake the MCAT. You are correct that we recommend ideally that a student take the MCAT a max of 2 times. When you start taking the MCAT more than twice, any sort of incremental increases become less convincing because you have previous scores which are all seen by the medical schools. And so any kind of increase at that point is not going to be kind of as impressive. So we like students to go in and take the MCAT the first time when they are the most prepared and the best prepared. And then if they find they need to go and retake it again to bump their score further, we want them to go back to restudy, to re-prepare, figure out what they need to do to improve their score, and then take it a second time. Okay. Can can patient community pharmacist experience be counted towards clinical experience research community service regarding med school applications? So we have certainly had students who have worked as pharmacy technicians, which I think is what you're referring to, and this is a fantastic experience. Again, I don't like students to sort of get hung up on what type of experience this is, because theoretically, as a pharmacist, you're not taking blood pressures. Maybe you're giving immunizations. You're obviously speaking with patients about what their symptoms are, thinking about drug interactions. You're speaking with physicians on the phone and consulting with them on the phone. So there's a lot of clinical knowledge and clinical talk in this type of position. And so we find that our students who work as pharmacy technicians tend to do very, very well in the application process, because this is an unusual type of experience to have, and a very, very good one. Okay, now I'm going to move to our questions from tonight that you're asking live. So please, if you have any questions tonight, please post them wherever you are watching this from, and I will go ahead and I'm going to try to answer as many as I can. How much is genetics course important for medical college admissions? Not every medical school requires genetics. There are going to be some medical schools that require genetics. Medical schools still like to see genetics, even if they don't require it. So I do think that genetics is an important class to take as an undergraduate. Absolutely. Shazla asks, how does a C+ in organic reflect on an applicant's application? A lone C+ in a weeder, very, very difficult class is not a deal breaker, okay? If you get a C+, even 2 C+, as long as they are outliers and the rest of your academic record kind of disproves that C+, and you have a strong performance on your MCAT to disprove the C+, this is not going to be a huge issue. So we most definitely work with students who have some low-ish kind of grades, like C+, B-, and they get into medical school. Again, this is about the big picture. It's about the grade trend. It's about the MCAT performance together with the undergraduate performance. It's about how you've done in higher level classes as well in the sciences. So if a student gets a C+ in a weeder class where there are many C+, a lot of students are getting C+, especially if it's at a college where the curve is, where it's curved very, very low, do not panic. All right. I know it's when students are taking organic, I know it's very early in the medical school application process and it's very discouraging. Hang in there, just go back for your next semester and just do as well as you can. All right. Okay. Without pay, working in a hospital as EMT, is that treated as volunteering or clinical? EMT work is most definitely clinical work. So clinical work does not have to be paid. You can be working clinically and doing that on a volunteer basis. So working as an EMT is most definitely clinical. This is one of the ways that is very, very common for pre-med students to get clinical experience. And it's great experience pre-hospital care. So we most definitely recommend that when it's available to a student. Divya asks, can we add the high school volunteer experiences in the med school application? Once you start undergrad, everything starts over. So unless you had something in high school that was really, really exceptional in terms of the experience you had national level research, you had publications, if it's an experience that, let's say the student started in high school and they've continued it through undergrad, then it certainly can be included on the medical school application. But medical schools are not going to want to see your high school experiences on the medical school application. Shazla asked, does it matter if some classes are taken at a community college over the summer? The general answer here is no. There are many students who will take a class or two at a community college over the summer. Those weeder classes where we were talking about getting C+ in organic, there are going to be many students who decide to, let's say, take physics or take organic, whatever sort of their weak subject is, they will opt to take that class over the summer at either a local undergraduate college closer to home or even at a community college. Medical schools do accept community college credits. Now, we do not recommend taking every single Weeder class and every single prerequisite outside of your undergraduate institution. That is going to be suspect if you try to do that. But taking one class over the summer for a prerequisite, this is something that is extremely common. And sometimes it's the only way that students can really fit in all of the prerequisites, depending on what else they're doing as undergraduate students. Working as an actual pharmacist would be a great experience for pre-meds, and we certainly have worked with former pharmacists who've, that was their primary job, and then they decided to go to medical school. So most definitely. Okay, Angela asked, does showing volunteer time in hospitals, et cetera, during high school help? As I mentioned before, whatever experiences the student had in high school, unless they're really exceptional, they fall off the application. They are not considered when it comes time for the medical school application process. Having that long-standing interest in medicine is certainly something a student may mention and can mention in a personal statement, but in terms of your application entries, your experiences, when you write about all of your experiences in the application in the same way that you do on the Common App for college, you're not going to be including experiences that took place in high school on that application. How many medical schools should you apply to? Again, a question that does not have a definitive answer. There are a lot of variables that go into this. The number one thing that I say to students is, how many reach schools do you want to apply to? Because there are many schools that, even for the top applicants, that are going to be very, very, very difficult to get into. There's some students who say, I want to apply to every, top 20 school in the country. That's fine. But then what we say is, okay, that's great, but we want to make sure that you have a safe list where we're fairly confident that you're going to be getting into medical school. So we want to make sure we have that balance. So it depends on what state you're from, depends on the acceptance rates for in-state students at those state schools. It depends on how competitive you are. It depends on where you're willing to go in the country. So there are a lot of variables, again, that we're considering when we're making up a school list with our students. I would say in general, most students are applying to between 20 and 30 schools. Depends on the student. It depends on a bunch of variables. But that's the average. Jennifer asks, my daughter is building her medical school list. So far, she has in-state schools and some private schools. Her undergraduate college has a list of out-of-state medical schools that take a large amount of students. Should she use this info in making her list? In other words, if certain public medical schools seem to like her undergrad, does she have a better chance for acceptance? So Jennifer, in order to answer this question, if her undergraduate college has a list of schools where a lot of their students are going, what I would want to know is, I would want to know how many medical school applicants is her undergraduate college sending to these, to these medical schools every year. So for example, let's say, the school has, 1,500 medical school applicants a year and they're taking 3 a year. Maybe that's not as ideal a number or as promising a number as you might think. So I would first of all look at the data, but certainly if there are certain schools that tend to sort of be friendly to the college that your daughter attends, then I most definitely think that those are worth applying to for her. Yes. Shazia asks, are there some extracurricular activities that are better than others? The short answer here is yes. There are definitely going to be some extracurricular activities that are better than others. But the longer answer is, the best extracurricular activities for your student depends on your student. We don't want students taking a checkbox type of approach to medical school admissions where they say, okay, I have my research and now I have my clinical experience and now I have my community service. We want them to be identifying what their interests are, what their niche is, And how are they showing evidence for interest in whatever the thing is that they are the most interested in? That can be one discipline, that can be two disciplines, but the best extracurricular activities for one student may not be the best extracurricular activities for another student. So we want what a student chooses to do. We want those decisions to be organic and to reflect their interests and to sort of make logical sense in terms of, I got involved in this and then that led to my interest in this, or through this experience I met this person who introduced me to this opportunity, right? So we want there to sort of be a natural flow and and a sort of organic kind of connection between the experiences. Angela asks, where can we find data that indicates acceptance rate of students into a med school? Angela, I think what you're asking is undergraduate colleges, the acceptance rates for specific undergraduate colleges into specific medical schools. Sometimes the undergraduate colleges will offer that information. Sometimes the medical schools will tell you where their students are coming from, which undergraduate colleges. And through the AMC, you can find which colleges have the most pre-meds, both in terms of applicants and matriculants. But I don't know of a database where you're going to really get all that information in one specific place. If you find it, let me know. Divya asks, my daughter was a national merit finalist in high school. Can we add that to the application? Divya, that's fantastic. Med school admissions people don't understand SATs. They certainly don't understand PSATs. So that's a phenomenal accomplishment. It means she did very, very well on her PSAT. She probably did very, very well on her SAT, but the medical school admissions committees are not going to care about that. They're going to care about her MCAT performance. So I can tell you that if she was a national merit finalist, I assume she also got very high SAT scores as well to reflect that. What that indicates to me is that she's going to have no issue with the MCAT, and she's also going to have a high MCAT score. Rochelle asks, would you recommend a DIY, do-it-yourself postbac if a student science GPA needs a bit of a boost to be more competitive? And would that then push them back a year in applying in the current med school cycle? In other words, can additional grades be submitted by October of the application cycle? So Rochelle, this is a great question. We recommend that students have 2 years of a high GPA. And by high, I mean like a 3.6 or higher. I used to say 3.5. I'm edging now more towards a 3.6 in terms of my overall recommendations. So certainly if a student is taking classes, let's say in the upcoming fall or over the upcoming year, that student can send updates to their medical school, but it's not going to be in the application itself that might get the student screened in or out. So we would want to see the overall academic profile, the courses this student has taken, the grade trend, and where that trend, like where they started and where they are now, and for how long have they sort of been at a higher level. And then we'd make a more specific recommendation if they need those post-bac grades before they apply, or if they can, kind of add those post-bac grades in while they're applying. It would really depend. When do interviews stop? Interviews are generally going to go into March. So around this time, and we still have students who are getting interview invitations. They are still rolling out. So by February, if a student does not have an acceptance, if they don't have more than, let's say, a couple of interviews where we think statistically they're likely to get accepted somewhere, that's when we want to start thinking about a reapplication. We want to start, analyzing the previous application. What can we do to improve the candidacy? What can we do to improve the overall presentation of the student? Sometimes a reapplication is as simple as just changing how we present the student. Maybe the student didn't really present themselves in the best way. Maybe sometimes it can just be as simple as changing the school list or submitting the application earlier, or maybe they need to do something to really improve their candidacy. So interviews are going to stop being extended pretty soon within the next month. But at the same time, a lot can happen in February. If we took AP Bio credit and take higher level bio in college, now knowing bio is a prerequisite for many med schools, is it okay to take biology at a local college or community college during the summer? My son is a current freshman. Absolutely. As long as your son has biology, this is why we do not recommend taking that AP Bio credit, because there are going to be many medical schools that are not going to accept that AP credit, and they also are not going to accept higher level bio classes in place of general biology. So certainly, I think it's a great idea for your son to take that over the summer to community college. It'll probably be a very easy A for him, and that will go on the on his transcript. 518 MCAT score is fabulous. Yes. So this to me, a student who is a national merit finalist, which means they got a very high PSAT score. I think it's out of 1520. You probably got like a 1480, 1490 or higher, something like that. That equates with a 518 MCAT. This is exactly what we would expect for someone who has high standardized testing. We expect them to get a 518 or higher. Absolutely. So that's great. Is international shadowing a credible one to showcase as a shadowing opportunity for BS-MD programs? Generally speaking, unless a student has a connection to a country, a personal connection, a family connection, like there's significance to that student's personal story at the country where they're shadowing or where they're volunteering, we generally do not recommend international experiences for the purposes of a BSMD application or a medical school application, simply because there is so much to experience in this country. So, some people call this voluntourism. Generally speaking, international opportunities, kind of either pay to play, or just, shadowing in another country is not going to be something that medical school admissions committees are going to look upon so favorably. But let's say your family is from that country and your grandparents, had difficulty accessing healthcare in that country, and that's part of your overall story. Then that's something that certainly, a student could do that would be very, very meaningful. So Rochelle, 3.6 science GPA that's good. We would want to know what state the student's from. We would want to look at the overall trend. It's kind of right on the cusp of needing a DIY post-bac, honestly. So we would need to look at a bunch of different factors. Participating in speech and debate clubs and excelling in the competitions at a high school level, does this have any advantage in school acceptance rate at the undergraduate level? Absolutely. I mean, certainly if you're looking to get into, the most selective colleges, certainly, doing well in speech and debate, especially if you're at, either national, you're competing at the national level, that certainly is going to really help you in the college admissions process. The college admissions process, in my opinion, is just a complete crapshoot. Yeah, but it helps. Everything helps. So certainly excelling in something like that is definitely going to help your student. How many hours of your time do you think are needed for what you just said if you need to reapply to present yourself better? I'm not sure what that question is. I don't know if you're asking about my time to evaluate the student or your time to help present them better. That's going to be really variable depending on, what pieces of the application we think really need an overhaul, and which pieces of the application we think, potentially can, sort of be recycled for the second time around. Almost invariably, students who end up reapplying, we're going to want to redo the personal statement and start fresh with a new personal statement. AP Psychology, AP Lang Lit, if you want to get AP credits for those as an undergrad, that's perfectly fine, because these are not prerequisites for med school. Absolutely. Sorry, I'm just looking at this. Okay, a 508 MCAT, a GPA of 3.99, research and clinical experience. What are the chances for MD? No interviews yet. I would be concerned. It's based on your name. It sounds like this is probably a majority applicant. I would be concerned with the 508 MCAT. That is going to be a bit of a hindrance. Depending on the state you're from, it's possible that it could lead to interviews in state, depending on the state. But the 508 is going to worry me, and especially sort of the mismatch between the 3.99 GPA and the 508 MCAT. It would make sort of, and again, this is just completely just sort of initial impressions. When you see that kind of imbalance, it makes you think, is the GPA inflated, or is the MCAT not an accurate representation of the student? And so we would probably recommend a retake if the student really wanted to go for MD schools, but we would also need to see the rest of the profile and the state residency as well. If a hospital only offers 2 hours of shadowing in order to allow more students the opportunity, is it worth it? 2 hours is, I'm assuming this is for a pre-med, an undergraduate student. 2 hours of shadowing is really minimal. I don't even know that I would include that on an application. If the student could get multiple shadowing experiences, maybe that they could all be lumped together, and that could be one of the experiences that's lumped together with all the other shadowing experiences. Did you say online classes in your college don't count? My daughter is taking online sociology. So Olga, if the class is offered by your undergraduate college, that can be different. What I recommend that you do, that your student do, and I would like to know what college this is. If it's a reputable college, the medical schools will accept that. But I would, because obviously there are some colleges that are going towards, remote classes and virtual classes. So I would check with the pre-med advisor at your daughter's undergraduate college, and make sure that this is okay with the medical schools. Yeah, so some medical schools don't announce acceptances until March, so February may be too early. That's correct. So there are some medical schools that release all of their acceptances at once in March, but I'm talking about interviews are unlikely. It's very unlikely that there are going to be interviews extended beyond February. There might be a couple. Every once in a while, we get someone who gets a March interview. They end up with a waitlist position. So certainly that happens, but after February, we're not going to expect many interviews to be extended. So UCLA is a reputable college, and I would check with them. And what you also might do is she might call, let's say, UCLA Medical School, and and just explain this class is offered online at UCLA, and is that going to be okay when I apply to UCLA Medical School, and ask them specifically. Tisha asks, what is a good balance of hours of volunteer, clinical, and shadowing for first-time applicant, no gap year? So I don't like to recommend absolute numbers of hours for anything, and that's because the number of hours a student devotes depends on what their strength is. It depends on what their strongest experiences are and where they are going to sort of set themselves apart. So, for example, the student who, let's say, as an undergraduate has accumulated 1,000 hours of clinical time doesn't have 1,000 hours of volunteer and doesn't have 1,000 hours of research if they're applying as at the end of the third year of undergrad with no gap year, right? So in terms of, you definitely want experiences ideally in all of these areas, volunteer, clinical, shadowing, but the number of hours we're going to recommend is really going to depend on what that student's strengths are and where their interests are and what their story is, and, and sort of where their spike is, so to speak, in terms of their interests. Is biochemistry treated as a prerequisite for medical school? Yes, most definitely it is. If we shadowed with multiple physicians through the entire winter break, 1 month, how do we get validation for that letter of recommendation from all the physicians or letter from the hospital or med schools? Just trust us. Med schools trust you. You are expected to be trustworthy, to have integrity, and you're going to just list this on your application. There's no certificate, there's no letter. Letters of recommendation from physicians whom you shadowed are generally considered more character references than anything else, unless they are academic physicians. So you're just going to list that experience as, during this month, I shadowed, this kind of specialist, this kind of specialist, this kind of specialist. Are genetics and microbiology important to take? Genetics, most definitely. Microbiology, not as important. My daughter is a sophomore. What on average should she have in terms of shadowing, clinical, and volunteer? So, Shazi, I just answered this. It's going to depend on your student in terms of what she should have in those different categories. Certainly, we want the student to have some shadowing, not too much. It's a passive activity. Medical school admissions committees expect students to have some shadowing, but we don't want them collecting hundreds and hundreds of hours, because it is going to be a passive activity. Whether that student sort of has most of their experience in clinical or volunteer or research is going to depend on the student's interests, how much the student can take on. If the student's taking a gap year, there are a lot of different variables here. Olga asks, is research in addition to volunteer clinical shadowing or instead of them? If a student is interested in going to an allopathic research-focused medical school, of which most allopathic schools are, we do recommend some research. Now, again, for some students, that's going to mean they have, let's say, a few hundred hours of research over 4 years or 3 years. For others, that's going to mean that they have a couple experiences of 1,000 hours or more, right? So it really, again, depends on what the student's interests are, what their ultimate goals are. But for osteopathic medical schools, research is not as important. So certainly, if a student is very, very heavy in clinical experience and they don't have any research, we would probably tell them that osteopathic med schools are probably going to be a more realistic option for them. We do like all of our students, if they're going for MD granting allopathic medical schools, to have some research. Even if it isn't their greatest strength in their application, we do want them to have some. Taking AP physics and AP chemistry at the high school level, is that suggested path to suggested path to med path at college level? I'm not sure what the question is. I think you're asking, so AP physics and AP chemistry, we would recommend that you retake those classes as an undergraduate and you not take the AP credit. In terms of getting into college, if you're going to be applying for a STEM major, those are most definitely classes that we would recommend, as they're probably the most rigorous in your high school in those disciplines. What is the average science GPA for admission? I would have to look that up. Honestly, it's about, I think, a 3.6 or 3.7. I don't know it off the top of my head. And remember that all GPAs are going to be viewed within the context of the applicant, where the applicant goes to school, the courses the applicant has taken, with colleges and high schools as well, with there being so much grade inflation. This is why the MCAT is still a very, very important metric for medical school admissions. So all of this is going to be looked at within the context of the student's experience and where the student went to college. From what I read, which may not 100% be accurate, it seems that low stat students have lots of acceptances and high stat students don't. That's not really our experience. I can tell you that and I don't know if this is where you're getting that information. I'd be curious to know where you're reading that. I can tell you that our students, our high stat students this year, are doing great in the process. So I'm not sure where you're reading that. So yeah, we're not having that experience. with our students. If you are participating in clinical research that is patient caring part-time, how do you decide what to call research and what to call clinical hours? This is a great question. So certainly students who have clinically focused research, it kind of falls into two categories. So don't worry about the categorization, okay? When you are writing about this experience, you are going to write about the fact that it involved patient care, that it involved working with patients directly. What did you do with the patients? What were your conversations? What were your roles? So the reader is going to see that this research experience encompassed hold on. They're going to see that this research experience encompass patient care as well. Would clinical research that is part-time patient facing count as research and also clinical hours? Yeah. So it's just what I just said. I would probably list it under research because it's research that involves patient care. But the person reviewing the application is certainly going to see that it kind of qualifies as both experiences. And certainly we work with a lot of students who do clinical research, and that experience will most definitely count as both research and clinical experience. Okay, let me just see if there are any other questions here. On average, how many interviews do your high stats applicants have so far? Several. Our high stats applicants have done pretty well this year. We don't really release that kind of internal data, but our high stats applicants are doing quite well in the process this year, actually. Okay, well, that was a great live. I thank you all for being here. Again, my name is Dr. Jessica Freedman. If you are interested in learning more about us and working with us, please sign up for a free 15-minute consultation, and we will go ahead and we will put that link in the workspace. And I hope to see everybody next Thursday night. And in the meantime, if you have any questions, please post them in the Facebook group. I am in the Facebook group every day, and I would be happy to answer your questions. And I hope to see you all next Thursday as well. I hope you have a terrific weekend and a great night. And thank you so much for tuning in. Bye-bye.